Please be seated. So thinking about Independence Day coming up this week, I brought this flag up here onto the chancel. This is the American flag. And in this country, this is a pretty important symbol of ours. The flag is something that we all hold with a degree of reverence and respect. And we have lots of rules and sort of regulations of how we're supposed to treat the flag. You know, when I was a Boy Scout, I spent a lot of time learning about all of the ways you're supposed to treat the flag. There's a special way you're supposed to fold it. There's a special way that you are supposed to retire a flag once it gets old and tattered. And there's special rules like what direction it's supposed to face, or that if it's on a stage, it's supposed to be on stage right. And for most of us, when we see the flag, if we're singing the national anthem or if we're saying the Pledge of Allegiance, we will stand and we'll face the flag and we'll put our hands over our hearts. But why do we do this? Why do we have so much reverence and respect for something that's just a piece of cloth with some stars and some stripes on it? Well, we do that because of what the flag represents. But even that isn't really a simple concept. Because what does the American flag really represent to all of us? I bet if I asked everyone in this room what the American flag meant to them, I would probably get a bunch of different answers. There's a lot of different things we can think about. For some people, they might look at this flag and think about our nation's history, or they might think about our government, or something in politics, or they might think about things about our American culture, or social movements and social injustice, or any of these sorts of things. There's lots of different things we can see when we look to the American flag. But what does it really represent? What should we think about when we see the American flag flying in this country? I want us to think about that as we talk about our reading from the Word this morning. And that reading came from the Gospel of Matthew, and like I said, it's sort of two stories that are side by side that might not seem really connected to each other, but together I think they give us a really powerful message. In the first story, this group of Sadducees comes to Jesus, and they have a question for him. You know, they're saying, we've been reading the Word, and Moses gives us this rule that if a man dies, that his wife should marry his brother so that he can help take care of her. And this was a law back in the time of ancient Israel. And they come up with this really complicated, specific situation where they say, what if you had a family that had 7 brothers and one of them died, and so his wife had to marry his brother? But then he died, and then the wife married the next brother, all the way down until she had married all 7 of the brothers, and all of them had died. When they get to the next world, who is she really going to be married to? Was this really bizarre, really specific situation they're asking about. And Jesus doesn't even answer them directly. He tells them, you guys are missing the whole point. Because that kind of arranged marriage doesn't even exist in heaven. That's not even how any of this works. And after they have this conversation, it says the Pharisees heard about it. So then the Pharisees showed up and they asked him another question. And they said, what is the most important commandment? What's the greatest commandment out of all of them? And Jesus answered and he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. He said, this is the most important commandment. And there's another one that's like it, that you should love your neighbor as yourself. And after he said those two, he said something really important and something that we want to think about this morning. After he says those, he says, on these 2 commandments hang all of the law and the prophets. Now, the law and the prophets is what they called the Word. So what he's saying is everything in the Word, everything that you've been taught, all of these scriptures and laws and complicated teachings, all come down to these 2 ideas of loving the Lord and loving your neighbor. Now, what do these 2 stories side by side tell us? I think that when we look at religion, a lot of times it's easy for us to get caught up in being like the Sadducees, where we're so concerned with theology and teachings and trying to figure out how everything fits together and understanding all of these things, that it's easy to get lost in the weeds. You know, there's so much in the Word, and there's so much that our religion teaches, and there's so much that we have to keep straight in our minds, that we can lose sight of what's really important here. But I think Jesus' message in the next little story there was, if you're getting lost in the weeds, to take a step back and remember what it's really all about. All of those laws, all of those teachings. What is the goal? What is the big picture? And that's when he gives the two great commandments. And the passage that I read from the teachings of the new church said that when you think about what makes a church, what is the church really all about with a person, it says that it's not about knowledge. It's not about our ability to wrap our heads around all of these complicated teachings and be able to answer questions like what happens when you have a family with 7 brothers and all of them die, and who is their wife going to be with in the next world. It says that what makes the church and what determines whether a doctrine is something that really is a part of the church or not with a person is the end in view. It's the goal. What are we trying to get to? What are we working towards? That's what really matters. And that's what Jesus was saying, was that when it comes to religion, when it comes to faith, when it comes to the Word of God, the end in view is always those two commandments of loving the Lord and loving our neighbor. So now let's come back to thinking about the flag. Like I said, there's lots of different things we can think about when we look at the flag. There's lots of things that are wrapped up in the identity of our country that we can think about. We can think about our politics. We can think about social movements. We can think about our government or our history. And just like with religion, I think it's easy to get lost in the weeds there, to get wrapped up in all of these different things and all of these different elements of what's going on in our country and where we've been and where we think we should be going. And it's easy to really lose sight of what the big picture really is with our country. But I think that's not what really makes up our country. I think just like the teaching about what makes up a church, what our country is really all about is the ends in view. What are our goals? What are we as a nation striving for together? What are we working towards? And on the 4th of July every year, what we celebrate is the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And that was a document that declared that we were no longer going to be colonies of the British Empire, that we were our own independent country. And in that document, we also set out our ends in view. We detailed the values that we as a nation were going to support and strive towards. And those were principles of equality. The idea that everyone was created by the Lord equal to each other, that no one is inherently better or worse than anyone else. And the idea of freedom, that no one should be controlled by their government or by a church or by anyone else and forced to live a certain way, but that we should all have the freedom to think for ourselves, to find what we believe to be right, and do our best to live a good life according to what we understand. And I think wrapped up in these values, underlying all of that, is the second of those great commandments of loving our neighbor. It's about respecting each other and recognizing that we are all different, but no one is inherently better or worse than anyone else, and that we are all working together to try to become the best people we can be. And so I think that when we think about the 4th of July, when we look at this flag, I think we can remember this story from the Word. And we can remind ourselves to not be like the Sadducees and try to not get ourselves caught up and lost in the weeds in thinking about all of these complicated elements of what's going on in our country. Those are important, and they're there. I mean, the laws that the Sadducees were asking Jesus about were laws that existed, and it was a legitimate question in some ways. But I think on a day like the 4th of July, we can remember Jesus' words, and we can think about elevating our minds and looking to what are the ends in view in this country? What are the goals that we collectively are striving for? And we can commit ourselves to honoring and supporting those goals in our lives every day. And when we do that, when we commit ourselves to loving our neighbors and respecting each other and honoring everything that this country was founded on, then we not only make our community a better place, but we help make our country a better place. And in turn, we can help make the world a better place. And when we do that, we're not just honoring our country, we are following the Lord's two greatest commandments of loving Him and loving our neighbors. Amen. Please rise for a blessing.